Hey guys, it's BlockchainBrad, and today we're talking about Vite. And if you're not familiar with that, that's the French word for fast. To explain this further, we have the executive of the Vite team, and this is Richard. Welcome to the channel.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great that you are here to explain exactly what this is. Now, on the website and also in the white paper, it explains that Vite is the next generation high-performance decentralized application platform. And essentially we're talking, as we mentioned before, about something that's highly scalable and very fast, but it's not compromised in any way with security or privacy. We're going to explore exactly why that is and how that is a universal DAP platform for the future. So Richard, obviously you are a key member of the team. No doubt you need to have skill sets second to none to lead this. What really positions you to do this, and what's your background?
Sure. So I have a Wall Street background. I worked in Goldman Sachs for over 8 years.
Okay.
I was in the fixed income trading strategies team.
Right.
So I was there for 8 years, and then after that I moved to Two Sigma, a $50 billion quantitative hedge fund.
Okay.
I was working in their New York office for 1 year, dealing with high-frequency data platforms. And then my second year I moved to Silicon Valley, and I was assisting with the business innovation and growth effort, effectively trying to incubate new businesses that would be beneficial for Two Sigma's franchise.
Okay, so you've had a lot of experience in the sort of the economic sphere.
That's right,
and
finance.
No doubt, yeah, exactly, and no doubt that positions you well, hopefully, for what you're trying to do here.
Right.
But let's explore this a little bit further. So you mentioned that you have had the Wall Street experience, but in terms of your academic qualifications, you have a BA and an MBA, is that right?
That's correct. I went to Dartmouth College in New Hampshire for my BA. I studied economics and computer science.
Right.
So, so hopefully I have a little bit of tech basis for understanding what's happening.
Right.
And also I have an MBA from NYU Stern. I attended the MBA program when I was working at Goldman Sachs.
I see. Well, thank you for explaining that. So the reason I ask is that clearly you have those credentials and also the academic qualifications to really potentially lead this out. Now, in terms of your team, I'd like to get this. I'd like to explore this a little bit quickly, because a lot of people talk about whether or not a team is capable of leading something so ambitious, and you're an ambitious project. Now, your team, there's all sorts of different skill sets that I see emerge from Harvard all the way through to Loopring. So tell us a bit about the different members of your team and what they really bring to Vite.
Sure. So our CEO, Chunming Liu, his English name is Charles.
Right.
He is a seasoned engineering leader in distributed systems and parallel computing.
Okay.
So he was the chief architect of the recommendation system at JD.com, which is effectively Amazon or eBay of China.
Okay.
And then he co-founded a Bitcoin exchange called CoinPort in China. So there he accumulated a great deal of experience in the blockchain space.
Right.
And most recently he led the architecting effort of Meituan's car-hailing app. So that's sort of like Lyft of China.
Okay, so these are big names. You're talking about Amazon, you're talking about big exchanges, and the Lyft of China. I mean, you've really, you've been successful in getting some of the most prominent people in this space.
Right. Well, thanks for the kind words. So Charles has obviously had a lot of training and accumulated expertise in areas that are very relevant to the blockchain that we're building. In particular, the car-hailing app requires substantial real-time applications, significant uptime, strong availability, and as the interview goes on, we'll be able to explain how some of these techniques feed into the blockchain technology.
And also your technology specifically, because clearly you're focused on highly scalable provisions for the dApps that are going to append onto your blockchain. So let's explore this a little bit further in terms of simply the industrial grading, in the sense that what I've noticed in your design is that you not only want to be scalable, but you want to suit industrial marketplaces and those where you can really cater for business. Can you explain to us exactly how Vite can do that?
Yeah, so there are a few directions that we want to go into. As a public blockchain that's high performance, we want to be general purpose, but at the same time we also want a little bit of focus at the beginning. Given my background and given what Vite has been built to be suited for, we believe that financial technology would be an initial area of penetration.
Right.
So there are a few different particular partnerships we're working on. So the first one that I can say is a loopring partnership.
Sure.
I didn't have a chance to explain a little bit earlier, but Daniel Wong, the founder and CEO of Loopring, is actually a key advisor of ours.
I see.
And he has been instrumental in bringing the team together. In fact, our CEO was in 3 different workplaces with Daniel, including co-founding the CoinPart exchange with him in the past.
Wow. And that's significant because Daniel has a great reputation in the space for his own practices and his own projects.
Right, right. Yeah, so he does have a very solid reputation. He continues to come up with new ideas, and he obviously has a very good trusting relationship with Charles.
Sure.
And with me, he was actually good friends with me for a long time as well. We haven't had the pleasure of working together, but ever since I heard about his engagement in the blockchain space, I've been fascinated. And he was able to persuade me to come on board as well.
I see.
But anyway, so going back to the partnership, so the first partnership would be with Loopring. We would have built-in protocol for Loopring. Loopring, to remind those that don't know, it's a decentralized crypto exchange protocol. It's a decentralized exchange as a service, if you will. So it was probably the most successful of its kind coming out of China.
Right.
And we will be having the built-in protocol in our system. So users of Vite would be able to issue tokens, would be able to, so from a user perspective, there would be a mobile wallet from which the users can actually trade tokens and so on and so forth. That would be the first financial technology app.
I see.
There's 2 other ones in the works. One of them is related to a it's to be honest with you, I'd rather keep those confidential.
No, I totally respect that.
Yeah.
And there's obviously, you want to keep some of the information to be released in time so that people can come to understand exactly what Vite is trying to do.
Right, right.
As you release, key news and key, I guess, deliverables.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that the Loopring one, that's already in our white paper, everyone knows about it. These 2 other ones are fairly recent, and one of them actually involves a sort of heavyweight player. So I think we'd rather respect their privacy at this point, and we'll be disclosing when the time is right.
Sure. Well, let's now talk about some of the key terms as well, Richard, with regard to exactly what you're capable of doing. Now, you lead a team where you profess that you can really facilitate the following things: low latency, usability, low delay, scalability, high throughput, and value circulation. So these are key features you argue represent your ethos and your company.
Right.
So tell us a bit about why they matter and how you're going to do that.
Sure. So if you think about the public blockchain as an information highway, ultimately the highway is only as useful as the cars that can run on it.
Sure.
Right? And then to continue the highway analogy, we want to build something that is fast, that is wide, and that is friction-free, and hopefully charges very little or to nothing. So the metrics that you mentioned, high throughput, low latency, good scalability, and good security, those are going to be the analogous features for the information highway that we're building, that is Vite.
Right.
So in terms of how we plan to realize all that, the fundamental, and I don't know if you're going to get into this later.
We will, definitely.
But,
sure.
But DAG plus smart contract would be one good way of capturing the essence of what we're trying to do.
I see, and we will certainly look into the DAG Ledger, we'll look into your smart contract complexities because you have some interesting things going on. But let's now talk about just essentially the term ultra high performance. Now, often there's certain things that people forego or designers forego when they're trying to create this kind of scalability. No doubt you want to ensure that there is privacy built in it, but how are you going to be ultra scalable? How are you going to be ultra performant?
So I think there's multiple things here, right? Number one is the fact that DAG in and of itself is already an improvement upon the blockchain ledger in order to provide better scalability and better performance.
Sure.
But on top of that, we're introducing the smart contract concept, which to my knowledge has not yet been done.
So you're doing something that's innovative and really leading the way.
Yes.
Okay.
So I think that actually is a contributor to the ultra high performance metric.
Right.
As people might have noticed, we haven't released any claims to TPS just yet. And in association to that, people might have noticed that we have a relatively long development cycle.
Sure.
So we're a team that want to under-promise and over-deliver. we are actually doing something, to be honest, incredibly difficult. One thing I want to remind others is that TPS is a headline number that's sexy, easy to remember, but characteristics such as scalability, such as security, are not captured by just one number alone.
And it's something that also evolves over time as you build this out, is that correct?
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. So when we come out with our MVP and when we release other features, we will be able to show, be more substantive about the kinds of metrics we're trying to hit.
Sure, so you, in a sense, you're almost in stealth mode where you're trying to just really look at the engine and see how it fires.
I like your explanation, yes.
Okay. Well, let's now talk about something a little bit more complex with regard to your consensus mechanisms. Now, you're asynchronous. You run a system or a consensus mechanism called HDPOS, so the hierarchical delegated proof of stake,
right.
And it runs on 2 layers. So tell us more about how that works and what separates it with that hierarchical nature.
Sure. So this actually involves an explanation of the snapshot chain,
right.
which is a key innovation in our architecture. So the way it all works is that DAG is a wonderful structure, a new way to organize the ledger, but it does come with a cost.
Okay.
So if effectively the way it works is that there are many ways to organize a DAG. The way we've chosen to do it is actually similar to Nano, right? So basically every single account has its own ledger, has its own blockchain, and as a transaction relevant to each account occurs, that transaction actually gets added to the blockchain associated with each individual account. So that's helpful from an efficiency standpoint, because now 2 transactions that have absolutely nothing to do with each other can now get added to the blockchain without having to wait on each other. So that helps with the throughput problem.
Right.
And this actually very much ties into the asynchronous message-driven, the asynchronous architecture that we have.
Right.
But as I was saying, there's a weakness. The problem is that some of these chains can be very short. And the whole point of a blockchain being powerful with the data being immutable is that as chains get longer over time, and if someone wants to tamper with the data at a certain point back in time, that person needs to do that for every single block afterwards.
Right.
And as chain gets longer, that cost of tampering increases.
Sure.
But with a account having a shorter chain, right, that benefit is no longer there.
I see. So essentially, if you're using the analogy of dominoes, there's less to fall.
Correct.
In that sense, if
That's
there was any risk.
That's absolutely correct.
Right.
So we basically added a snapshot chain, which does the following. It basically, in every X seconds, or every once in a while, it takes a picture of the universe in the way of taking the most recent transaction off of every single account, concatenates them together, and then adds them to, and then creates a block containing that information, adds them to the snapshot chain. So it's kind of like taking advantage of the blockchain concept here,
right.
and basically chaining up the information of the universe over time. And then subsequently, the benefit would be that the cost of tampering with any data would increase over time.
So obviously you've built a sort of a mechanism for security.
Correct.
Okay.
It's a way to take advantage of the benefit DAG has to offer while curing or mitigating the security deficiency that it comes with.
Sure.
So to answer your original question of HDPOS,
sure.
It's a hierarchical DPoS because there's a DPoS happening at the local level, at the chain level, at the account level, and then there's a DPS happening at the universal level, where the snapshot chain basically decides which chain is correct when there's forking.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now in that respect, you're talking about these two aspects. You've also had these 2 layers built in, known as the local and the global, with regard to a single group of validators, and you also have your consensus for, arguably, is it in the case of for a group of nodes?
That's correct. So there's a group of nodes for at the local level. There's a group of nodes at the higher level, right? So these are the super nodes or consensus nodes, right? Or consensus group of nodes.
Sure.
And the local consensus group of nodes would be there to basically create, in case there's forking, they would be there to come up with the right candidates, right? Okay. Which ultimately will be selected at the higher level by the snapshot chain to ultimately decide what the actual look of the universe should be.
So that's quite an innovation, because I haven't read that in any other white paper before. Is that something that the Vite team have come up with?
So the snapshot chain is, I think, the most important innovation here, and then the hierarchical DPoS is a byproduct of that.
I see.
The whole point being, there's going to be local sets of chains, and there will be a universal observer, if you will, that decides which version of the forks is absolutely correct.
Okay. Now, Richard, obviously there's some precedent blockchain designs and platforms that we know of. First and foremost, we know of Ethereum. Now, it's referenced in your white paper, but you're arguing that you're going beyond that. So let's talk about how you can make that claim.
Oh, sure. So, well, a couple of things, right? First of all, Ethereum has this concept of smart contract, and we are adding the concept of smart contract on top of DAG.
Right.
So similar to how Ethereum is a leap from Bitcoin by having introduced the concept of smart contract, we're taking DAG and adding smart contract on top of that.
Sure.
So the second thing is that we're actually coming up with a language called Solidity++,
right,
which is maximally compatible with Solidity, right, which is the programming language for Ethereum smart contracts. And the idea there is that the reason why we're called ++ is because we have incorporated asynchronous function calls, if you will,
sure,
asynchronous message-driven architecture that basically allows parallel processing of threads, if you will, in the smart contracts. So I think in that sense, it's another improvement on the Solidity language.
So you're building upon rather than doing something entirely separate in the sense of in the context of Ethereum, because you're looking at what the best of potentially what Ethereum has to offer, and then really exacerbating that to provide a new platform where you can arguably be cross-chain compatible.
I think you can think of it that way. So the reason why we want it to be maximally compatible with Ethereum is just to lower the cost of having to port code by programmers. Right?
Sure.
For someone to be receptive of our platform, to adopt this language, the fact that they don't have to learn a totally different programming language is very key to us.
Now, given that you're going to be ++ by nature, is it possible, from your knowledge of what you're building out, that there could be a considerable mass exodus of some that are utilizing the Ethereum network and move across use if you're going to be ultra performant?
That's certainly a possibility. The way we think about it, though, is maybe a good analogy is perhaps the story between C and C++, right? So I mean, there are different things you can do. Sort of. If we want to be really rigorous, though, there are things that you can do in C that you can't do in C++. But in general, C++ comes with a richer set of library. It comes with a great suite of functionalities that were previously not available to C. So it is sort of an upgrade. And in our case, it's sort of like that as well.
Okay, well, you've heard it from one of the key bosses of Vite in the sense that we're looking at something that's innovative and really building upon what already exists in the blockchain domain for quality platforms. Now, asynchronous architecture, we've mentioned that, but what about the terms event-driven architecture and message-driven designs? What really makes these key components?
Yeah, so the idea really comes from the asynchronous architecture, right? So a good way of thinking about asynchronous architecture is like the difference between making a phone call and writing an email, right? So I'm on the phone with somebody, I can't really be talking to someone else while I'm on the phone with that person. With an email, however, right, before I wait for a response with somebody, I can send an email to A, and then send an email to B, and then send an email to C, and maybe, now I hear back from A, and so on. So your conversation becomes a lot more efficient. So the asynchronous architecture is more the latter, the email, than the former, the phone. So when you talk about message-driven, event-driven, those are a way of implementing the asynchronous architecture, right? So we've decided to go with a message-driven design, if you will. So the way it works is that previously you would call a function and you had to wait for the function to finish, right? And then for the function to return a value back to you, so it's A equals F of something.
Right.
But now what you do is you say, okay, you're going to call that function, right? That function actually doesn't return anything. You don't wait for it. You just go on with your business. And then later on, that function is going to provide a value to you in some other way, and you just pick it up. And then in the meantime, you have not waited for that function to finish execution.
I see, so it makes it more efficient.
Right, and then the way to implement that is called a message-driven architecture. And actually, to be very fair, that's not that's not like a totally new thing. It's just something that we've adopted as part of the asynchronous architecture framework.
I see. You mentioned looping before in the sense that clearly Daniel Wang is a key member of your team. He's a prominent figure in the blockchain space, but he's also developed a very exciting matching engine whereby you can use more than one party. In fact, you have multi-party. So how important has that technology been in sort of melding or meshing with yours?
I would say it's a very nice value add to our system. I mean, going back to the highway example, it's kind of like us having a Tesla run on our highway.
Right.
Or us having existing infrastructure to support a Tesla car.
Sure.
So that is not to say that is the only kind of exchange protocol we'll be supporting. There will be other efforts, and maybe it's our team, maybe it's the community members that will support other types of decentralized exchange protocols on top of that.
I see.
But the fact that Daniel is a key advisor of ours and we are implementing a very good project to start with, a very good protocol to start with, that's a very good start.
So essentially, because you're a platform, you are not protocol specific, you are protocol agnostic.
Correct.
Okay. Now, in terms of cross-chain value, let's talk about that. What about prospective blockchains? What's the vision? Can you cross-collaborate? Can you establish some sort of cross-chain relationships with other blockchains?
Yeah, so our vision is that we are a public blockchain. We're starting from scratch, and we're in parallel to Ethereum and all these other public blockchains.
Sure.
And we will try to implement cross-chain asset transfers with Ethereum,
right.
And then we would send out these requests to the community. In fact, we were considering a bounty program coming up in various aspects concerning attraction of other DApp developers or other just blockchain developers to build out our ecosystem.
And are you talking to any other blockchains other than Ethereum currently?
We've initiated the discussion. But some of these are sort of like the partnerships I previously talked about.
I'd say that you can't tell us.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, and on that, we actually started an incubation effort.
Right.
So one of the key members of our team actually has a lot of resources in the blockchain space, and he will be looking after the incubation effort. This is actually in our most recent update, which we just released this morning.
So is that also focused on prospective projects that can onboard onto the platform?
That's correct.
I see.
Right.
But it's exciting if you're building out your own facility, essentially like a lab.
Yes. We're actually called Vite Labs. The company.
Okay. Well, there you go.
So, but to finish up that thought regarding doing more cross-chain sort of implementation in terms of cross-chaining with other chains outside of Ethereum, we'll actually make that a community effort.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining that. Now, we mentioned before, you alluded that we would eventually get to the smart contract, Richard, so we're here now.
Okay.
Now, you have reactive contracts, you also have a design in which you are using the Solidity++, but we haven't really talked about the virtual machine and the role it has. Okay. So let's talk about the Vite VM in relation to the EVM and how the reactive smart contracts play out.
Okay, so we are maximally compatible with EVM. So that basically means the code that's used to run that's used to run on our platform. It looks very much like Solidity, except for cases where asynchronous architecture is invoked, right? So in terms of Vite VM, it's you can think of it as very similar to EVM, except for the asynchronous part.
Okay.
And then in terms of the smart contract aspect, the idea is the following. DAG itself is a very powerful thing, but it has not been used for the purpose of smart contract, at least until now. So historically, the way that works is that a transaction, right, a transfer of asset is decoupled into two things. There's the sending action and the receiving action. And the sending action and receiving action, they go on to their respective blockchain related to their respective account. Okay. Right? So the way it works is that we basically treat each smart contract itself is also an account. Right. And each smart contract itself, right, also has its own blockchain. Okay. The invocation of smart contract and the execution of smart contract, these two individual actions actually go on their individual chains very similarly to the way the the to the asset transfer is done, right?
Okay.
So basically, you can think of us as taking the concept of DAG for asset transfers and migrating that over to smart contracts, right?
And you're the first, arguably, that's ever done this or attempted this.
To my knowledge, yeah.
So how long did it take you, Richard, with your team to find a mechanism or the code in which that was possible?
So the white paper actually took a while to write. I believe it was over like 2 or 3 months.
Right.
Yeah, and it was a lot of back and forth between our CEO, our tech partner, and with Daniel.
So in that context, given that you're referencing the white paper, is it at the plausibility stage, or has there been any testing done that this is, because you mentioned that, or alluded to prototypes potentially?
Yeah, so we've done some preliminary testing. We don't have a test net yet, that's a very different story.
Sure.
But we are planning on releasing an MVP sometime by the end of the year to showcase the abilities.
Okay. But so far, so good.
So far it's been okay, yeah.
Okay. Let's now talk about the whole point of this, and that is to have applications, to have use case, whether it be in business, whether it be for any specific use case in the real world. Tell us a bit about how we can apply this technology.
Yeah, so we are trying to be a general purpose platform. So ultimately, whether we can deliver on high throughput, low performance, high scalability, and good security, those would be the ways to measure, those would be the key KPIs for success of this project. But in terms of specific applications, we are going with financial technology to start with for various reasons.
Your Wall Street background would also...
That has to do with that. So we have a lot of connections and resources in that aspect. And then, so in terms of specific plans, the first idea that we have is the partnership with Loopring, as I alluded to earlier. And separately, there are a few other projects on the way, and we'll announce them as they become ready.
I see. So you mentioned Loopring, you've mentioned some of these partnerships, but what I did want to ask you, no doubt you're having conversations with partnerships with those in perhaps the financial sector, but in traditional markets as well. Have you found that there's genuine interest from those, I guess, industries?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are examples of other public blockchains currently forming partnerships with various non-crypto entities. So, for example, someone recently started a partnership with a subgroup within the United Nations.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's very impressive. And then also there are other companies that we talked to that started that have formed connections with accelerators in Silicon Valley. So that would be entities like Y Combinator, 500 Startup.
And they're very reputable because they're merging the two worlds of crypto and non-crypto investments as well.
That's correct, that's correct. And that is sort of the entry point for a lot of innovation, right? Because new companies, that's the very definition of incubators.
Sure.
So that would be one place where these more traditional sort of applications would find use of these blockchain platforms.
And clearly your connections, given that you come from that environment, if you're starting in the financial sector, you're starting in a very privileged position in many respects because you're already built through your own due diligence those connections to really onboard perhaps some of these key players. So we're looking forward to seeing that coming forth. Now, with regard to your investors, I mean, you have to have good strategic foundations and good strategic support. You have Bitmain as one of them. You have Starling Capital, Genesis, Node Capital, OK Blockchain, Link VC, and Cosmos. And it's interesting, Cosmos is actually interconnected with my own country of Australia. But I did want to talk to you about Bitmain. Now, Bitmain is a very significant asset you have in being a strategic partner. Tell us a bit about how you secured that and why that's beneficial for Vite.
Yeah, we feel very fortunate to have secured investment not only from Bitmain but from these other brand name companies.
Sure.
So with Bitmain, we were first introduced to them by one of our advisors, and our CEO had a relatively long conversation with their CEO actually.
Right.
I
think
that
Jihan Wu?
Yes, Wu Jihan.
Right.
Yes, and I think there's a few different aspects that they find interesting. Like everyone else, they look for technology, they look for team.
Sure.
But I think maybe beyond that, they also look for just a sense of, I guess, I don't know what's the right word, maybe a sense of trustworthiness, perhaps.
Sure.
Not to blow my own horn here, but I feel that...
Or even credibility, perhaps.
Right.
In a degree that
right.
There's potential for both parties to work together and trust each other.
Right, right. So I think that conversation went very well, and then the investment came shortly after.
Right.
Yeah.
So the reason why I broached it is that they don't tend to invest in so many projects, so they obviously saw something in you that was valuable. But to go one step further, is there something whereby Bitmain can benefit from the technology itself?
That's a great point.
Or is it solely just for investment purposes?
Yeah, so I think that in the crypto space, a lot of companies have started horizontal expansion,
Sure.
right? So a company that used to be just a VC has also started a consulting service.
Certainly, we've seen a lot of capital firms emerge.
Right.
For example, we have NEO, we have NEO Global Capital, we have Ontology Global Capital. So is it more that sense of...
It's sort of like that,
I see.
yeah. I mean, it'd be great if we can actually be useful to their core business as well.
Right.
You know, they make mining machines, so who knows?
That's what I was wondering. I was wondering about that. But let's talk about some of the other investors. Are there any of your investors who actually have some sort of collaborative plan? Other than Loopring, obviously, with Daniel.
Right, right. There's one entity I need to talk about.
Okay, sure.
OK Blockchain Capital.
Okay.
So that partnership was recently announced. So they're a major player in the financial technology sector.
Okay.
Albeit being a new emerging one, they're a very important one. They've become a very large one.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually recently announced a partnership,
mm-hmm.
and you can see this on our Telegram channel,
right.
where we'll be collaborating on a few different fronts. So number one, obviously they become an investor of ours.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, they will be giving strategic advisory for our decentralized exchange implementation plans.
Right.
And number three, from the perspective of me being in having the benefit in Silicon Valley,
Sure.
we'll be offering, we'll be providing resources and connections from the overseas circle to them as they are actually based in Asia.
Right, okay, so obviously you have real world, the company has real world plans to collaborate properly with you.
Correct.
Now if I gave you 3 words, Richard, if I said to you performance, scalability and security, which one of those would be paramount to you in the context of what you're designing?
I'd say performance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why would that be?
So the idea is that performance itself already captures a number of key characteristics. So throughput, latency, and these are very important to us because we want to be built.
Mm-hmm.
So basically the idea is that there's different attributes that can't all be satisfied within the design of a blockchain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we basically tend more towards the performance aspect.
Okay. So in that respect, I did want to ask you and broach the challenging topic of competitors. A lot of people don't like that, particularly CEOs or CTOs or CMOs. The reality is that we are looking at a very competitive market, whether or not we want to say comfortably that there's enough space for everyone.
Yeah.
But again, if we're talking with the like of Dfinity, for example, focused on performance, as you mentioned, are you at all concerned, that other projects are doing any like things right now?
I think, to be honest with you, I'm not too concerned, just because it really comes down to what you can deliver. This isn't one of the situations where you're an e-commerce company and you have to adjust your strategy based on what your competitors are doing.
Right.
This is more like this isn't like a football game. This is more like a marathon, right?
Okay.
So you just focus on what you do.
Sure.
And also the other good thing that we've seen is that DAG seems to be becoming a little bit more popular as being adopted by the newcomers. And for us, I think that's more of a blessing than a curse, just because it's being validated by other industry players.
I see.
So to be honest, we welcome competition. We want to build something that is useful. So to the extent that we can kind of propel each other forward, I think that's a good thing.
Absolutely.
Right.
Now, speaking of fundamentals, let's talk about token. Something that a lot of people do want to know more about, and I'm not sure how much you can tell us. But right now, let's talk about that in the context of ICO itself. Are you doing an ICO? And if you are, let's discuss it.
Yeah, so we completed our private sale, and we have decided not to do an ICO.
Okay.
But instead we'll be doing a series of airdrops, and we're trying to be very creative about it. We're trying to identify fans, we're trying to identify loyal customers and investors that will be with us in the long term. Okay,
so no ICO. Let's pull it back though into your private round, and let's explore what you can tell us with regard to essentially the amount of money that you retained for those rounds, no doubt that you had. Did you have an initial seed round?
No, we only had one round.
Okay, so one round in the private sale.
We only had one round, and it was the same terms across all investors.
Okay, so it was very egalitarian by design.
Yes.
Okay, can you tell us about those details?
Sure. So investors, the price is 1 ETH equals 7,000 Vite tokens.
Okay.
That's the same across the board.
Sure.
There's a lockup plan. So there's a monthly release of tokens, 20% for each month over 5 months.
Okay.
And then the capital raised, a substantial amount will be used for R&D. R&D plus marketing make up for 80-85%.
I see. And how much was the actual raise itself of that round?
The total amount was about a little bit less than $30 million US. I guess that really depends on the USD to ETH.
Sure, because it changes every day.
The rate, yeah.
Right. So what about the team in terms of vesting periods? So obviously to incentivize the value of that for the team. No doubt you've not made it possible for them to go and sell their tokens quickly.
Correct. So we've allocated 20% of the tokens for the team, and there's a 2-year lockup period to incentivize the team to deliver a long-term, to deliver value in the long term.
I see. So what was the fundamental reason why you decided to do this as flat, one round?
That's a great question. So I think one idea that went into it is that so as an investor, you always want to get a discount.
Sure.
And but you're also wary of someone else being someone like a cornerstone investor that has the better price. Right?
Sure.
So we just decided it's easier to just have one price for everybody.
Okay. So let's now talk about the public access in the next step. How accessible is it going to be to access Vite tokens? Is it going to be something that's going to be so priced it's going to be just really challenging given the airdrop? Is it going to be something that's entirely fortune based in terms of luck? What's the plan?
Oh, so in terms of the airdrop plan, we're doing a number of them, right? So all I have to say is pay particular attention to our Telegram channels because I'm sure everyone's heard of these really creative and random airdrop plans that other companies have.
Well, we've seen Mainframe do this actually with very creative ways that actually require them to do different things in different contexts around the world.
Right.
So with regard to your token itself...
So can I just make a quick point on that?
Yes, of course.
So there's a number of things we'll be doing, right? So we have plans to release tokens to those that can prove that they're true fans of ours, that understand our ideals, that don't necessarily completely understand the technology, but at least understand what we stand for and what we're trying to deliver. We'll also be releasing tokens to those that are contributors to the blockchain space in particular.
Okay, so those are the good actors, those that are trying to essentially educate in some shape or form, trying to contribute in some way that's positive for Vite. They'll be rewarded no doubt through this mechanism, this plan. Now if we talk about native tokens versus ERC20, what's the situation now? Are you first ERC20?
Yes, we are currently ERC20 and we'll be converting to our native token once our mainnet launches.
Okay. Now, if we talk about one of your key aspects, your VEP, so your Vite enhancement proposal, so tell us a bit about that and what exactly is that about?
So that's a mechanism that we'll be using to get the community to be involved in expanding our ecosystem to build out more features. So, for example, like any other open source GitHub project, it's always more powerful when you get others involved. And the proposal that you're referring to is a standard way that we come up with to incentivize other programmers.
Okay, so let's move that across into the context of social media for a moment. What are you doing to engage the community, or what's your plan so that people can interact more, can discuss more about Vite, and more importantly, be an active participant in the evolution, iterations as you progress?
Sure. So we have a fairly active Telegram channel, and that's for places outside of China. Within China, we have a fairly active WeChat set of WeChat groups, and we are fairly active on Bitcoin Talk. Okay. And I'm obviously talking to great YouTubers to get the word out there.
Thank you.
And and also the campaigns that we'll be launching as part of the airdrops will get the word out there and hopefully get people to talk to each other and communicate to each other about the interesting features that he has to offer.
So how's it going so far in terms of, if you peek in and you look at what's going on, no doubt you're active in Telegram, how's the conversation currently?
So as you would expect, people ask a lot of, there's different kinds, right? There's people asking questions about exchanges, about the private sale details and so on. But sometimes you will also come across very thoughtful questions.
Sure.
And we actually have a fairly long Medium piece where we explain to some very thoughtful fans about how we go about doing this. I encourage everyone to check those out.
I see, so you're also using Medium as a written platform. Now, let's talk about the academic influence you had, because when I read through the the academic influence that you had and the references in your white paper, there were significant names that were brought up. So how important has that academic sphere been in developing this project?
Yeah, so our CEO actually came from China Academy of Sciences. And then he and Daniel both studied at USTSC, which is sort of considered as MIT of China.
Right.
So they obviously have a huge amount of network as well as influences from the academic circles. So me being in Silicon Valley, I hope to be able to do outreach to key influencers in the academic community out here to basically get their feedback and advisory on our project as well.
I see. Now, one thing I did want to broach with you, and obviously it wouldn't be a fair interview, I didn't raise some concerns.
Sure.
One of the concerns I have, you mentioned airdrop. We've seen a propensity for airdrops to be problematic for the integrity of the Telegram before, in the sense that sometimes you'll get such an influx of participants that it really waters down the quality. Are you concerned at all, Richard, that this could happen in this process?
No, it is a potential concern. We don't want to airdrop to people that ultimately don't care about the project, because if someone doesn't care about the project, they're just going to sell it right away, and there's really no point in doing so. We want to reward the kind of behavior that is congruent with that shows an interest in our project, shows an understanding of our ethos.
So it's behavior specific, it's not going to be random.
It's not going to be a random thing, yeah. So we've come across, we have thought long and hard about ways to do this, and then if the result is that the number of people that we're giving the airdrops to is small, but they turn out to be true fans, then so be it.
Sure. Now, Richard, have you heard of any other criticisms? Obviously, you're engaged in the community, and no doubt with your own your team. Are there any concerns you have right now that need to be raised with regard to as you evolve? In terms of tech, in terms of any concerns that possibly you may have?
Well, we're trying to recruit really hard in Silicon Valley. I live in South Bay, and the competition for talent is fierce.
That's a good answer.
So I suppose that could be one issue, because we really want to keep our community engaged and provide more content to our audience members, if you will, and keep them informed. But that content, if it needs to be thoughtful and interesting, it takes time.
Sure.
And our team currently might be too small to handle it, so we're trying to expand on that front. I think we're actually very fortunate from a community management perspective to have received a lot of support from various volunteers. They're such big fans that they're willing to just manage the channels for us. I mean, we have channels for English, for Chinese, for Thai, Vietnamese, Russian, and Korean now.
Yeah, so you're seriously expanding across the globe.
Right, and a lot of these community members are just doing this out of their love for us.
Wow, you're very lucky to have that kind of voluntary support behind it. No doubt they believe in your project. Now, Richard, is there anything that you can think of that perhaps through the interview you wanted to address as a final statement, or something you feel that needs to be really addressed?
I ultimately want to come back to an original point that I made, and that is, for a blockchain company to survive and thrive, it really needs to find real-world applications, and without that, without that, it's not going to do well.
Sure.
In the long run, at least.
Sure. So essentially, you're building out something that, let's use the analogy of a city. You're not just simply building out the framework with the buildings, but you want to have people actually move into that space and use it for business, and even for people who enter into homes as an analogy for functionality, so that there can be an actual city that works. So, Richard, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. We learned all about this Vite, the French for fast blockchain platform. We've learned that it essentially is moving far beyond what Ethereum is currently doing. It's got Solidity++. It's looking at exactly how the integrations can happen, but really improve its own performance and not subject it to vulnerabilities in terms of privacy or scalability, not be compromised in that way. We've learned about it essentially as a next generation high-performance decentralized application platform, not just for today, but arguably for many years to come as it becomes a credible blockchain that enters into the business domain. So thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you, Brad. Thanks for your time.
You're welcome.